Hello and welcome to The Real Talk. I'm your host, Sierra, and today we have our special guest, Nadia. Nadia will be sharing her story of cannabis addiction, when she realized she needed help for her substance abuse, and how life-changing treatment was for her. Let's get into it. Welcome, Nadia.
Hi, Sierra. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're welcome, and we're so excited to have you. So, your life over the last few years has been quite a journey. And you are one of the people who was quite dependent on cannabis.
That's right.
Yeah. And you went to treatment for it. You got help for it. And I feel it's not something that's really talked about that much. So we're here to tell your story.
Absolutely.
So before we get too far into your story, we just want to address something that is a myth when it comes to cannabis use. And that is that you cannot physically get addicted to cannabis. Can you address this a little bit further?
Yeah. When I first started smoking cannabis, everyone said cannabis is not addictive. There's no such thing as cannabis dependence. There's no such thing as cannabis addiction. I think it's important to look at the facts here, which is that 1 in 11 people who use cannabis do develop an addiction to it. 1 in 6 people who start using cannabis as a teenager or a child develop an addiction. And 25 to 50% of daily cannabis users develop an addiction.
That is a lot more than I ever thought.
Yep. There is a cannabis withdrawal syndrome that many people experience. There's physical symptoms, there's mental symptoms, and it's quite often a barrier to people who want to reduce or quit smoking. By the age of 18, 19, I was smoking cannabis every day. After work and on weekends from the moment I woke up until the moment that I went to sleep. At this point, I probably was dependent, but it wasn't really something that I acknowledged at this point in my life. Into my mid-20s, it started to affect me really negatively. And while I was in college, I realized that I did have the goal of trying to reduce how much cannabis that I smoked. I talked to a doctor about it. I talked to a counselor about it. And I found myself at certain points in my life able to reduce what I was smoking, but never able to stop. It didn't become a big problem until my late 20s when I realized that almost everything that cannabis did for me was negative to my life. At this point, I started to have just a lot of bad feelings around my smoking. I was really upset with the fact that I smoked so much and I really wanted to change. But every time I tried to quit, I couldn't. At this point, it had progressed from, regular use to dependency to full-blown addiction. And everything had just spiraled out of control.
What's the difference between dependency and addiction?
So dependency comes first and addiction comes second. Dependency to a substance usually is something that we see pretty frequently in people who smoke cannabis and in people who use other substances as well. Usually at the point of dependency, you experience certain symptoms related to needing to use the drug or the substance, such as strong cravings, increased amounts of use, increased tolerance. Eventually, that progresses to addiction, where it starts to affect your life really negatively, and you start skipping out on your obligations or things you enjoy, or you start having issues with money or the law. And at that point, they consider that a full-blown addiction.
So another myth about cannabis is that it doesn't have any negative effects on your health, which it definitely can. Can you go into what some of those negative effects can be?
The anxiety for me was a big one. I was under the impression that cannabis helped my anxiety. Who was I wrong? One of the greatest benefits that I experienced when I quit cannabis was that my anxiety 90% went away. It was black to white. I experienced a complete change in how anxious I was as a person. And I had no idea that cannabis was exacerbating it that much. Again, I knew from word of mouth and resources that it could exacerbate anxiety, but I was one of those people who was like, that's not how it affects me. It doesn't do that to me. Boy, was I wrong. And it wasn't just while I was smoking. It was the rest of the time too. Like, it was my resting level of anxiety, even when I wasn't using cannabis. It constantly affected me.
Yeah.
And I just thought anxiety was part of my life. And now I live an almost anxiety-free life.
Okay. And then there's one more.
Yeah. So the big one that I experienced was something called CHS. That stands for cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. It's something I hadn't heard about until really recently. And to be fair, I think the research had to catch up on cannabis use, because with legalization being somewhat recent, I don't think there was enough evidence for us to really pin this to cannabis use. But what CHS is essentially the profuse upset of your stomach and your GI tract to the point where you feel nauseous and vomit. It's one of those things that, like my anxiety, wasn't just while I was smoking. It was also when I wasn't consuming. I started experiencing nausea maybe around age 25. And at first, I completely attributed it to other causes, like medications I was taking or the type of food I was eating. And it was pretty mild at that point. It was just like nausea and a little bit of heartburn. I didn't go on any medication for it. I mentioned it to my doctor. We just moved on because it wasn't super detrimental to my life. Over the next several years, as my cannabis use increased, it got so much worse, to the point where every single morning I was waking up with extreme nausea. I would have a cup of coffee in the morning, and quite often I would vomit before being able to leave the house. I eventually got some advice from a doctor who told me, hey, I think this might be your cannabis use causing this. Have you heard of CHS? And I hadn't. And I did some research on it, and he educated me, and I realized that potentially my nausea and vomiting was being caused by my cannabis use. Not everyone gets it, but what he told me is that when you're a very heavy user and you use very frequently, it can be something you experience. When I stopped using cannabis, it did persist for a little bit, maybe about a month, and now it's completely gone. We confirmed that it was in fact my cannabis use. It wasn't the food or my medication or something else going on in my GI system. I don't get nauseous anymore. I don't vomit anymore. I mean, unless I have the stomach flu or something. But it's, again, completely gone since I stopped using cannabis and detoxed fully from it. So it's a big one that a lot of people haven't heard of. And when I started to experience it, I had no idea that it could have been contributed to my drug use.
Yeah, I actually know quite a few people who have had it over the years, and like yourself, didn't have to go to treatment for it, but they had to stop smoking completely, because every single time they smoked or even consumed any sort of cannabis, they just would get so sick from it. And the only cure besides, quitting, is hot showers.
That's what the doctor told me too.
Yeah.
She said, if you want to rule out that there's not something else going on with like your stomach, she said, when you're nauseous or vomiting, take as hot of a shower as you can handle. And if it goes away, then it's CHS.
Yeah.
And she was correct. It did go away.
Yeah. So yeah, the people that I know that have had it, they would sometimes, their episodes of CHS would be days, and they would just spend the entire time in the shower, in the bath. And that was the only thing that helped with it. Nothing else would help with it.
When I was in treatment, I was given medication that is given to cancer patients for their nausea, for the nausea and vomiting that I was experiencing. Because when you're in treatment, you can't spend the whole day in the shower. You have to spend the time in your classes or with a therapist or doing whatever other activities they have laid out for you. So I actually had to go on medication because my CHS was so bad.
So when did you decide to seek out formal help for your addiction?
So I did mention it to doctors, various doctors, through my mid and late 20s. Eventually, I wasn't able to access any, I guess, specific cannabis related outpatient treatment options. Eventually, my employer actually facilitated an assessment with an addictions doctor. I went to this assessment. It was 5 hours long. We got into all of the substances I've used in my entire life. We got into what happened during my childhood, what happened during, my teen years, what happened during my college years. We talked about my physical health problems, my mental health problems. We talked about everything. It was the most thorough medical appointment I've ever had. At the end of this appointment, this doctor told me that according to the severity of my substance use disorder, which was deemed severe, it was deemed in the highest category. She said that the treatment that would be recommended would be 30 or more days of inpatient treatment. So what people regularly hear of as rehab.
So how did you prepare yourself for treatment?
In terms of mentally preparing for treatment, there was a lot to it. I did a lot of counseling during that period. I had a counselor who I really just used to vent about what I was going through and how bad my addiction had gotten and all of my fears related to going to inpatient treatment, which was something completely new to me. She really helped me by laying out what to expect and what treatment was going to be like. I talked to a friend who had been through something sort of similar, and same thing. She told me about what a day-to-day life would look like in a treatment center. I did a lot of, I guess, what you would call emotional regulation and coping skills. It's something that I've worked on in therapy in the past, and I actually did open up my binder from that treatment to go through those skills and refresh myself in preparation for all of the work I was going to do. I ended up writing a lot. I wrote down where my addiction started and why it was so bad. I wrote down every single negative thing that cannabis did for my life and all the positives too. And I can tell you that list of positives was really small and that list of negatives was huge.
Yeah.
I had reached a point where there were no more positives. The only positive I think I was getting from cannabis was that it helped me sleep. And I'll acknowledge that that was great. Still was absolutely not worth all the negatives that I was facing. In the weeks leading up to treatment, I started to get very antsy because when you go to treatment for one substance, it's not just one substance you're there for, you're getting off of all substances. So for me, that really just meant that I wouldn't be consuming cannabis or alcohol. There were some things that I wanted to experience too before I went to treatment, like going out for a steak because I knew I wouldn't get one for a while I was in there.
Fair, yeah.
We went to like a seafood place and got lobster because I'm like, I'm not going to have a lobster in 30 days, which I don't know why I felt that. I hadn't had a lobster in years before that, but that was something we did. We went for lobster and a lot of spending time with family. I knew that, so at this point I was now away from home. So I hadn't seen my friends in a long time. I knew I wasn't going to see them for a very long time. And I knew I wasn't going to see my family for a very long time. So I spent a lot of time with them just having good times, I guess. And that was really therapeutic for me.
Yeah, because I guess at that point you were almost saying goodbye to a version of yourself and you didn't know what you were going to be like when you came back to.
Absolutely, because I spent my entire adult life using cannabis. I had no idea who I was without it. I had no idea what life would be like without it. It felt like part of my identity. It felt like it was necessary for me to enjoy my hobbies. It felt like it was necessary for me to socialize. It felt like it was necessary for me to do anything. Like before having dinner, I would use cannabis. Before playing video games, I would use cannabis. Before having a friend over, I would use cannabis. It was what I did before I did anything else. And knowing that in a week or in a few days I was going to wake up and not have that was really distressing.
So before you mentioned fears, and I think everything you just spoke about was probably part of the fears that you were, thinking of and facing. Was there other things as well?
Yeah, I had a lot of activities that I specifically did in combination with cannabis. The first thing that comes to mind is art. I am a hobby artist, not a professional artist, but for my whole life, or at least my adult life and my late teen years, I used cannabis while I did art. And I had this gnawing question of, am I going to be able to pick up the paintbrush again when I'm not using cannabis? Same thing with video games. I always combined video games with using cannabis, and I wanted to go home and play this video game that I was working on, but I was like, will I be able to do that? I was so scared that I would lose all these hobbies that I had. And then I also had friends. I had people who, when we hung out, we used cannabis. And that was always what we did.
That was the activity.
Yeah. And of course, socializing. But we would use cannabis, socialize, use cannabis, socialize, use cannabis, socialize. Drinking was kind of the same way. Although I wasn't drinking that much until the later stages of my cannabis use, I knew that all of a sudden I wouldn't be able to drink. I wouldn't be able to go to the bar with my friends. Well, I mean, you can go to the bar, you just can't drink. So I worried that I was going to lose all of these social interactions with certain people, and I wasn't sure how to navigate that. I knew I had people who supported me and wanted this for me, but at the same time, I was so scared I just wouldn't be able to spend the same amount of time with these people, and that maybe I would lose friends.
So we talked about the fears and the struggles going into it, but what were you looking forward to and what were you wanting to get out of treatment?
Yeah, there was definitely a lot to look forward to as well. And it came with a lot of anxiety and anticipation and a lot of not knowing. The biggest thing I was looking forward to was being free from my cannabis addiction. And I just so desperately wanted to wake up and not think about using for the first time. I also knew that treatment would be in a cohabiting environment and that I would meet a lot of people there. And I'm a very extroverted person, so I did look forward to making new social connections. There was also a lot of available activities at my treatment center. Like we had a bowling alley, there was ping pong, there was volleyball courts and basketball courts.
You're forgetting your favorite.
Pickleball courts.
Yep.
I learned pickleball and I didn't think that was something I was looking forward to, but I ended up loving it. It was so much fun. I bought my own pickleball set. I ordered it online and shipped it to the treatment center. And
I didn't know that.
I sure did. I shipped it to the treatment center and I took part in pickleball tournaments, and that was a lot of fun. I also really looked forward to, I guess, just being able to spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, actually 6 days at my treatment center, working on my mental health, because I had never had that opportunity before. I had always either been in school or working an almost full-time job. And although I did take care of my mental health, I did do counseling and I saw doctors and I did what I could with my schedule, I never actually had the opportunity to just truly invest in it. And that was something that I really wanted for myself. And I knew I had to take this opportunity to do that. And there were certain goals that I had that I wanted to work through when I went into treatment and that weren't specifically addiction related. I had some childhood trauma that I wanted to work through. I had a lot of separation anxiety with my sister that I really wanted to work on as well. I had some friendships that I wanted to work on. And I, at the time, thought that I really wanted to work on my anxiety, but in leaving cannabis behind, my anxiety actually kind of took care of itself. So that was a huge thing to look forward to. Basically, a full-time, all-encompassing mental health treatment.
Yeah, I think especially in this day and age where it's like we're so encompassed in the hustle culture and you have to be working and, you know, taking time off can be seen as a huge negative. And you
Yeah.
get people asking you, like, what do you mean you're off work? Like, you seem fine. Like, they don't understand that side of it.
I also didn't understand the gravity of how much work and time this would take. When I initially saw the addiction doctor, I thought I would be off work for maybe a month or two to go to treatment and just come back. And that's not at all what happened. When I had, you know, my medical paperwork filled out by my doctor, he initially wrote on there that I'd be off for 6 months with the possibility of an extension. And I was shocked by that. I'm like, what? We don't need 6 months for this. I ended up taking a year off of work. So we really did need that time. And it doesn't happen overnight because there's so much stuff to do first, stuff to do in treatment, and then follow-up work to do after treatment. And not only do you not have time to do the follow-up work while returning to work, you also just need to invest in what you're doing. You need to invest in your recovery and you need to invest in your mental health. So the medical professionals knew that was what was going to happen, but I had no idea.
So February rolled around and treatment was here and ready for you. What did that first week or so look like for you?
It was crazy. The first day was so hard. I got to the treatment center. I hadn't smoked that morning. I went to a type of treatment center where you're allowed to use all the way up until when you walk in the door. So people will often show up intoxicated to this treatment center. I didn't. I had taken a plane to get there and I showed up completely sober. It was already hard to not smoke that day. I tried to treat it just like I was going to work and just get the morning routine done, get there, and everything will be okay. It was not okay right off the bat. I had woken up at, I think, 4 a.m. to get on an airplane that day, so I didn't get a lot of sleep the night before. When I got to the treatment center, I asked if I could just sleep. That was after all of the procedures that you have to go through when you first get there. So there's lots of paperwork to sign. You have to have all of your belongings searched. You have to... I was on something called CWA protocol because I had been drinking. So that's basically a protocol to monitor for alcohol withdrawal. So they have to check your vitals very frequently to make sure that you're not going through a physical alcohol withdrawal. So the nurses were coming in every hour, every 2 hours to check my vitals. And it was just very busy. I laid down and I tried to sleep and I was unable to do so because every 7 or 8 minutes, someone would walk by my door and burp or fart extremely loudly and yell, "Excuse me," and walk away. I then later learned that I shared a hallway with someone we now call Eggman. This man partook in 20 to 40 boiled eggs per day from the cafeteria. And as you can imagine, his bodily functions were rampant. So I couldn't sleep.
No.
I couldn't nap. Eventually I got up and they take your cell phone for the first few days to help you focus on treatment and get into the routine. I felt like a lost puppy without my cell phone. I got out of bed and I went to they have like a patient phone on the wall. And I called my sister and I just told her, I'm like, I don't know what to do with myself. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's going on. It was awful. She said, "Can you go talk to the nurse? Can you ask them to hang out with you or something, distract you?" And I'm like, okay. So I went to the nursing station in tears and I said, "I don't know what to do. I can't sleep. I don't know what to do." And she said, "Okay, let's go. Normally we'd give you your first day off, but let's go and get you into a class so that you have something to do and it'll take your mind off of things." They got me set up with a binder and they took me down to one of the orientation classes. That definitely helped. The orientation classes are really just to orient you on the facility and educate you about addiction, educate you about treatment, talk about what types of therapy you're able to do in treatment and what the next 6 weeks will look like. After that, I met some people and I sat down in the lounge and started talking to some of the people I was living with. It was a co-ed facility, so it was men and women, and I started to make some connections. Then the first night was rough. I wasn't able to sleep. They did give me some sleeping medication, and I still couldn't sleep due to the lack of cannabis. It's also, you're sleeping in a hospital, essentially. It's loud. There's light coming in from under the door in the hallway. They open your door every few hours to check on you. I had a roommate for my first night. She was really quiet, but I did hear some horror stories about not being able to sleep because your roommate snores or tosses around in their sleep. There was even people who had night terrors. So I was extremely lucky in that department. I had a roommate just for the first few nights, and then I was alone for actually a huge portion of my stay. I didn't get a lot of sleep. They wake you up at 6 a.m. I don't know why. Medication isn't until around 8. So they come in at 6 a.m. and you need to give a verbal response. So some people will just grunt at them and then go back to sleep. But like for me, at least that first day, I couldn't fall back asleep after they woke me up. So I got up at 6 a.m. I wandered out to the lounge and I just kind of sat there and watched the news with some people. I, again, felt so foreign in my body and in what I was doing because I was sober for the first time. I was in a new city. I was in a new living facility. No one around me I knew. I was being monitored constantly, drug tested constantly. I was on camera constantly. It was a lot. And then, of course, I didn't have my cell phone, so I couldn't contact all of my support mechanisms, my friends back home or my sister. I could use the phone to call, but unfortunately, I can't be on the phone 24 hours a day. It's just not reasonable. After the first couple days, things did start to get better because you make friends and you get into the rhythm, the routine. You start seeing the doctor right away and they do a big assessment on you and they determine, what medications you need and what supports you need and a few other medical things. I was referred to one of the specialist doctors. I was referred to a psychiatrist to manage some psychiatric conditions alongside my recovery. That happened right away. I didn't get in to see them right away, but the referral happened right away. The first week was the hardest for withdrawal symptoms. I was put on Zofran, which is an anti-nausea drug, a really strong one. They can't give you Gravol because people like to get high on Gravol.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, they like the way it makes you drowsy. It doesn't make me drowsy personally, but I wasn't allowed Gravol. I had to go on this Zofran, which is a super strong antiemetic drug. They actually can give it to like cancer patients and stuff. I was so nauseous that I couldn't eat. I could barely drink anything. It was so gnarly. And the lack of sleep really got to me that week. I asked to see the doctor about it right away and be put on some medication for it because the combination of not using cannabis and sleeping in a hospital in a foreign place was just too much for me. And I really value my sleep. It was probably 2 or 3 weeks until my sleep stabilized. And I did take sleep medication the entire time I was there. It's just the nature of sleeping in a hospital with 60 other people. It's pretty hard not to. And I think most people in that facility were on sleeping medication. I was very lucky that I had no problem getting off of my sleeping medication going home, but that can be a problem of its own where you become now dependent on a medication to sleep. And now you can't sleep when you get back home. For your first week, the classes or groups or therapy sessions, they're all very basic. You're in these sessions with just a few people who are new to the facility. It was a rolling intake, so people are constantly being admitted and constantly being discharged. So you see a lot of new faces in these classes, and they're not the people you're going to spend the majority of your groups with. The people in the first phase classes can be very sporadic because a lot of people come into treatment, they stay a few days and then they leave, or they come into treatment intoxicated or in acute withdrawal and then they leave. So it was a little bizarre to start out because you'd have people in these classes going through some of the worst withdrawals of their life, or you'd have people in these classes who had snuck in drugs and were high on certain substances. And then you see a lot of new faces cycling in and out. So it was a little bizarre to start out. You get to meet your counselor, like the counselor you'll be with for the whole time you're there in your first week as well. But it's very much so just an introductory meeting where you talk about, this is why I'm here. This is what my substance was or my substance is. This is what life's going to look like when I'm done treatment. So it was a lot of telling my story over and over and over and over to a doctor, a counselor, a group facilitator, a psychiatrist, a dietitian. You know, there's consults with all of these people. And then additionally, I had a medical treatment that I was undergoing that I also had to see a medical doctor for while I was there. So now I've got this second doctor involved, and I have to walk down to their office on the other side of the building and, again, tell my story over for a fifth or sixth or seventh time.
Which is exhausting on its own.
It is.
Yeah.
In addition, the first few days, you are confined to the ward. You cannot walk around the building or the grounds. Once they start to figure out what kind of person you are and what your substance use issues were, you'll get what's called house privileges or grounds privileges. I think I got mine 4 days in. I was placed on the ward for quite a while because of that alcohol withdrawal protocol.
Right.
They would need to monitor you a little bit more closely during that. I actually didn't experience any alcohol withdrawal symptoms, but they still have to monitor you. So about 4 days in, I was able to go outside, and they're on a huge 50 acres or something, and they've got a river running through the property and just beautiful, beautiful grounds. I finally got to walk around and breathe outside air after being cooped up inside a hospital for 4 days.
Yeah, even though it was February in Ontario.
I still went outside.
Yeah.
I still went outside. It was super cold, and I was in my winter boots and my winter coat. I walked around the facilities and I familiarized myself with the place. I was able to go and check out, the gymnasium, the workout center. They actually have like massage therapists and physiotherapists on site. So I was able to go and book in with those professionals and just explore. There's a lot of really cool things in this center. It's a huge center. They have a greenhouse. They have a library. They have a church. They have, obviously the cafeteria. So for your first few days, your food's brought to your room. I wasn't even able to eat with my peers. I had to eat in my room because I wasn't allowed to leave the ward. So like day 4, I was able to walk down to the cafeteria and actually, talk to people while having my meals, and that was great. Once I was kind of let off the ward, things got a little bit easier. I got my cell phone back. I was able to contact my family and, go on social media and chat with my friends. And that was really good. And that made me feel a lot more normal. And then again, being let around the facility was great. So near the end of week 1, I started to feel a little bit more normal.
At the beginning of that, you mentioned that there were a lot of people coming and going in that first week or so. What do you mean by that?
So this particular treatment center doesn't operate under involuntary care. So everyone who goes into this treatment center, at least in the program I was in, is there voluntarily. They are choosing to be there. They can choose to leave at any point. There are people who are being forced to be there by external programs, like maybe the court system or their employer or the Department of Transportation. For example, if they have a DUI, they might be required to do this program to get their driver's license back. But at no point are you held there against your will. So if you leave, you might face consequences from whatever program is forcing you to be there. If I had left, I would have maybe faced consequence from my employer or, not been allowed to return to work. But at no point will they hold you against your will. So if you show up and you do a couple days and you don't want to stay, you can walk out that door at any time. There's there's no legal right to hold someone there in that facility. We don't have that for addiction treatment in Canada. It's not a mandatory treatment. So at any given point, people could come and leave. And anytime someone leaves and a bed opens up, a new person comes in, and they're full at all times, you know? There was one point during my time at that center where we had a COVID outbreak. We didn't do admissions during that time. So I think there was like 10 or 15 open beds. Otherwise, it was full pretty much the whole time.
So once you got settled in and passed that first week, what did a day in treatment look like for you?
So as I mentioned, at 6 a.m. they wake you up. Once I got more comfortable in the facility, I would wake up, talk to them at 6 a.m. and then go back to sleep. Around 7:30, I would get out of bed and I would either go down for breakfast to the cafeteria or get my meds, depending on what time I woke up at, because meds were at 8 a.m. When you're in a treatment facility, you can't keep your own meds on you. They, even if you came to that treatment facility taking your own meds, which I did, they actually have to dispense them to you every morning out of like the medication room, just like in a hospital. So you line up at a window, you get your pills, you take them in front of the nurse, you show them that you swallowed them, and then you can go about your day. So you'd start first thing in the morning, taking your meds and having breakfast. A lot of people skipped breakfast. I am a notorious breakfast skipper. I would always have a coffee. They have coffee on the ward, and they have some snacks on the ward too, like juice and fruit and stuff. So usually first thing in the morning, if I was hungry enough, I'd go down for breakfast. If I wasn't, I'd make myself a coffee, and classes start pretty much right away. When I say classes, it's maybe not the best word to use because it's more like group therapy, but it's very classroom-like. You sit in a room and someone teaches you something and you do activities together, you do homework, and it's very structured like school is. The schedule is pretty tight. You do a lot of classes during the 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. time, and then occasionally an evening class. It wasn't all classroom style, though. There was also some very cool recreational therapies. So we did what was called horticulture therapy, where you work with plants. There's recreational therapy, where you do something active, and you can choose what you do during that time. I did a lot of pickleball. There was one point my shoulder was a bit sore from pickleball, and I did ping pong instead. You can do yoga, you can do basketball. It's pretty much like a free gym class to do what you want. We had music therapy, which was super cool. There was two different types. One of them was essentially, imagine like a music class when you were in elementary school. You would play xylophones and drums and hand chimes, and you would learn basic instruments. It was super, super cool.
I was going to say, that sounds really fun.
It was. The other one was called Songs for Recovery, which was a fantastic group. I loved that group. Basically, it's a music sharing group. So you go in with a song that's either helped you in your recovery or it's relevant to your recovery, and you share it with the group, and we all listen to it and then we discuss it after. So this was a great opportunity to learn about new musicians and new music that you had never listened to before. I came home with a playlist of songs from this group that I really liked, and I shared some of the music that was really important to me in my recovery. It was always a great class. The music therapist we had was fantastic. He was so good at his job, and these groups were some of the most therapeutic and soul-saving because you spend so much time working on mental health stuff and working on your problems and working on your addiction and talking about stuff that's hard to talk about, that it was so nice just to go into a group and bang on drums or play pickleball or listen to songs. And some of these songs were so relevant that they brought people to tears, myself included. It was one of my favorite parts of the program. Your day would also be built around solo appointments. So solo appointments with a therapist or solo appointments with a doctor. You see the doctor once every 2 weeks or every 1 week if you have more complex needs. and you see your therapist once a week solo. You see them a lot in group as well, but just one solo appointment per week. So during the times of the day where you're not in class or group or therapy, it's pretty much do what you want within the rules, obviously. So on the ward, there's lounges with TVs and games and puzzles. And then outside of the ward, there's the gym, there's the rec center, and there's the grounds. And you can do whatever you want. You can hang out with your friends. You can hold events. We had pickleball tournaments. We had chess tournaments. A lot of us would have like a wing night where we would order chicken wings and watch basketball. I'm not much of a basketball girl, but I'll eat chicken wings, you know? So I made a lot of friends there. I met a lot of really cool people and people who had very similar life experiences to me. I am still friends with some of these people. Some of them have drifted away. I very quickly kind of developed my own crew of people. And you do that in any place you go, whether it's school or mental health treatment. And you build relationships very quickly because these are the people that you're around 24 hours a day. You eat, sleep, work, you do everything with them. So I had a group of friends that we had similar taste in activities. We would do puzzles, we would watch movies, we would watch TV. You build a lot of mutually beneficial relationships there. You build a lot of relationships that give and take, and people who can help you out with things that you're working on in your personal life or in your professional life. I had a job interview while I was in there, and I had, people help prepare me for that. You start going down for dinner with your friends and sitting with your friends at dinner and going to the library with your friends and playing pickleball with your friends. And because these people are around you 24 hours a day, you get very close to them. And I don't want to describe it like prison because I've never been to prison, but I've watched shows about prison and it seems very similar in that respect, that like you develop relationships maybe with people that you wouldn't in the real world, but because you're around them so much, you just do. The dynamic was a little bit interesting in there. At any given point, the ratio of men to women was like 6-1. It was a very man-dominated facility. And we talked about this a few times in group to maybe discuss the reasons for it. I mean, I don't think I have an answer, but yeah, living in a treatment center as a woman with 50 men around you can be difficult at times. I did struggle with the gender disparity in there. I did struggle with a little bit of toxic masculinity. I did struggle with even sexual harassment. So there's a lot of good, and there's also some things that were very hard. The staff were absolutely fantastic, and they handled issues as they came up. But unfortunately, they can't change the dynamic of the treatment center or the makeup of the people who are in there because it's healthcare and everyone is allowed access to healthcare, whether they are a criminal or not. So criminal activity can happen in there and people can be victimized. And that's something that is unfortunate, but it's true. It does happen. So the sexual harassment that I faced was very underhanded. It was very almost not noticeable at first. And slowly it kept happening and it kept happening until it almost got physical. It almost turned into physical assault. And that was the point where it clicked that I was being harassed. And it was always the same person. I brought it up to the staff after that incident, and it was taken very seriously. Actually, some staff members came forward and talked about them being harassed by this same person. And a couple more patients came forward and talked about them being harassed by this same person. They gave me the chance to pursue legal action. I was not interested because I was so far from home and I didn't want to fly across the country to go to court for something that happened and didn't, affect my life that negatively. I thought about it because I did want this person to face consequence for their action. But what I really wanted was the facility to take steps to make people safe and prevent it from happening again. So that's what we did. We worked on, like basically risk management for this person and how to manage them while they were in the facility. They ensured that I would no longer have to cross paths with this person. They ensured that this person would be recommended to go to an all men's treatment center next time, and that if there was a next time, I should say. And they had essentially like a big risk management meeting about it, and talked about how staff can handle these things when they happen. When it happened to me, there was a staff member present. It was a male nurse, and he observed the interaction. He stopped the interaction, but he actually never reported it to anyone. I reported it myself the next day. That was an issue because an incident report should have been made so that we can track these things and prevent them from happening in the future.
To me, the fact that this person had, harassed other people and staff members at the facility, it's really shocking that no one reported it before you did. And I don't know, like it just seems like wrong in a way, and it kind of shows where we are even in 2025, that there is the fear behind reporting these things, the fear of backlash or something negative happening because of it.
I think there's truly a culture of, I guess, in addiction and mental health treatment that this is normal. And although it may be common, that doesn't make it normal or okay. And I'll be honest, the first few times it happened to me, I didn't report it. It kind of came to a climax, and then I felt like I had to say something. And I did say, to the people I reported it to, I should have reported it the first time, but I didn't. And I think when you have predators like this, they harass in such a way that it's almost in a way that it can be seen as innocent the first time it happens.
Or playing around.
Yeah, or joking. Yeah. And the first few times I did take it as a joke. But then when it almost became physical, all of a sudden it wasn't a joke anymore. I was backed up into a corner and I had my hands up like this and I was pushing this person back. And that was when I realized this is harassment. This isn't just a joke. This is harassment. This person is a predator. And right now I am being victimized. And I have a very strong personality. I'm someone who does say something. I can guarantee you that these things happen all the time and someone doesn't report it. Even staff, I think staff become complicit in the fact that they work in healthcare, therefore they're going to experience some kind of harassment. But that's not okay. It's not. Healthcare workers are still humans and they deserve to be treated with respect from their patients. They deserve to work in a violence-free facility, and sexual harassment is a form of violence. It's tough because fostering a culture where reporting these incidents as they happen is so important. But I think in a facility that has 5 times the men as it has women, it's really hard to foster that culture. And I don't want to sit here and say or imply that men are the only perpetrators of sexual harassment, because they're not. This was just what I experienced while I was there. And I experienced harassment from a man and men who observed it happen and treated it like a joke when it really wasn't a joke. So there's a few things we can do. And the biggest one is that when you experience these things, speak up. And that's what I did. And that's what I should have done earlier. And I hope that maybe that was a wake-up call to some of the staff at this facility, that maybe if they're experiencing harassment, the patients probably are as well.
Over your stay, what were some physical and emotional changes that you started to see in yourself?
Physically, my CHS resolved over the course of treatment. It did take quite a few weeks, but by the time I was done treatment, I wasn't experiencing it anymore. My anxiety got so much better. Again, that was almost immediately too. Like after that first week of acute withdrawal, my anxiety was black to white just from not smoking. So those were the biggest ones that I noticed. Mm-hmm. Emotionally, I became a lot more in touch with my mental health, my trauma, and the root of my addiction and where it really started. I talked about things in that treatment center that I had never said out loud to another human being before. I had just kept them inside because they were so dark and often illegal that I didn't feel safe discussing them, even with my closest friends and family. Mm-hmm. I remember telling my therapy group the deepest, darkest secret that I have. And it stems back to my time in addiction with other drugs. It was very cathartic because I was finally in a place where I was ready to discuss this. And I was in a place where people had gone through similar things or even worse, and they weren't shocked by it. Whereas if I would have told like one of my friends back home, they might have been like, what? Like, what? That happened? Oh my God.
And I guess with that comes like the potential judgment and like conversations that you might not want to have.
Yeah. And it's really important to lead these conversations in a way that's managed by a professional. That's why there's a facilitator to all of these groups, where if someone does pass judgment onto you, the facilitator will stop them and say, hey, that's not appropriate. We don't respond to people's experiences like that. So it's a very controlled environment. I'm not going to say it never got out of hand, because there were times it did. Mm-hmm. But I had a very good therapist who was great at managing conflict as it arose. And I finally got these things off my chest that had been bothering me for years. They had been my skeleton in the closet. We actually did this one activity where it's called a Phoenix letter. It's where you write a letter to something that you want to let go of, and then you burn it. I had to type mine because I had hurt my finger in treatment and I couldn't write with a pencil. I know.
Of all things to happen.
I know.
Yeah.
So I had to type mine. It's not as personal when you don't write it out in pen on paper. I'll acknowledge that. So mine was typed and printed, and I wrote a letter to my younger self, when my younger self who was present when my addiction started. I had so much anger for letting myself become a drug addict. I had so much shame and guilt, and I really needed to acknowledge that I was a child. And I was a child who was really struggling with my mental health, and that it wasn't my fault. So in this letter, I basically forgave my younger self. And I said, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that this happened. You were doing the best that you could with what you had. And then I burnt it. We went outside and we put a bucket on the ground and we burnt it. And we would read it out loud first and then burn it. And I cried while reading my letter and writing my letter. I cried during both. And emotionally, it took so much off my back. I had needed to get those words out for years. I had needed to say those words for years. And I just hadn't been given the opportunity or the space to do it. I left treatment feeling emotionally healed from that part of my life. And I actually was able to start a trauma therapy when I got back home and tackle more of those feelings from that period of my life, because I was finally ready. And I had finally let go of the shame that I was holding and the blame that I was holding. This blaming of 17-year-old Nadia, who did not deserve that blame. And emotionally, I made this journey through dissociating from these things and rejecting these things to talking about them, forgiving myself for them, and beginning to acknowledge that they happened for a reason, and that reason was not that I was inferior or that I was stupid or that I was bad. For many years, those were the feelings I held about myself, and I don't have those feelings anymore.
So earlier you mentioned that the requirement for treatment was 30 days. Is that what happened, or was there more to it?
So the addiction doctor basically mandated that I do at least 30 days. But the actual wording was that I complete an inpatient addiction program. Every program's a little bit different. So the one that I went into was 6 weeks, so 42 days. That's not always what happens, though. So my case was a little bit different. After I got to the treatment center, we addressed that there was the need for me to start a new medication. This medication was one that had to be monitored very closely while I started it. I wasn't able to get into a psychiatrist until maybe week 4 or so of treatment, just due to the wait list that she had. And they wanted to monitor me longer than just 2 more weeks. So they essentially applied for me to have my stay extended. And I actually did a total of 56 days, so 8 weeks in treatment. So I stayed longer than everyone else pretty much there. I spent 2 months in an inpatient treatment center. And by the time I was done, I had started this medication, stabilized on this medication, and was ready to go home. And I was really ready to go home. The last 2 weeks were very hard. If you think about it, it's a rolling intake. So by the time those last 2 weeks rolled around, it was all new faces on the ward. It was all new people. All of my friends had left. All of the connections I had made had left. And I was about to leave too. So I wasn't really in a place to emotionally make new connections. The last 2 weeks were very, very hard on me. I was so ready to go home. And I totally recognized the value of staying those extra 2 weeks. I was still emotionally done. During those 2 weeks, because it's a rolling program schedule too, I had also done all the classes already. So there was an opportunity for me to work on some other stuff that had come up for me. So they took some programming out of a different mental health program and kind of applied it to me. And they gave me some extra help from like a social worker and a dietitian and something called an occupational therapist. I saw different professionals that worked on different goals because the addiction treatment was technically done. I had done all 6 weeks of classes, and I would be redoing classes if I just did the same thing. I did redo some classes, and that's okay. It's just part of being there. But I also got to work on some of the logistics of going back to work, some of the executive dysfunction I was facing, and some of the other mental health conditions that I experienced that I had never really worked on before, or just never had the money or the time to work on. So they really tailored the program to me, which was great. And I don't know if they do this with everyone. I was very willing, and you have to be willing, right? So I got extra work given to me and extra checklists and extra questions and prompts. And I worked through what's called a relapse prevention plan. I worked on the original one, which was for the addiction, and I did a second one for some other mental health issues that I was having, which no one else really does in this program. That was kind of something they tailored to me. So although I did a longer stay than everyone else, I actually got a lot more out of the program than maybe your average lay patient would have. By the end of it, I was very ready to go home, though.
But did you find the extra couple weeks helpful in the long run, though?
Absolutely. I think having those 2 weeks to stabilize on this medication and ensure it was right for me, that was extremely valuable. That's not something you can do in the community. Don't get me wrong, you can have follow-up appointments with the prescribing doctor, but you'll never be monitored daily the way that I was in this program. And the extra therapy that I got in, especially with the occupational therapist, was so helpful because an occupational therapist is not covered by my benefit plan. It's not something I would have the option to see back home. And she was really great. She was able to work with me on some things I was really struggling with. The most helpful thing we did was a prioritization matrix. We worked on prioritizing things in your life, and we looked at all of the issues I was facing currently, and we used this matrix to decide which things I needed to work on right away, which things could be done in like 2 to 4 weeks, which things could be done in 2 to 4 months, and which things were just going to take off my plate for a little bit. So I just had so much going on with my job, with my union, with my family, with my mental health, my medical health, that I was overwhelmed, and I desperately needed some help with prioritizing how to manage this giant, giant list of tasks that I had going on. So that time with that therapist was one of the most beneficial parts of the program for me, in just coming home and being able to continue with my life duties and get them done in a timely manner.
So now that you've completed treatment and you're back home and doing well, what does your new life look like?
Well, the biggest thing to me is that I don't wake up every day and want to use cannabis, and that's huge. I don't think about it anymore. I've had thoughts about it, but they're so few and far in between that it's a miracle. I know that that's the point of treatment and that's what it's there for, but I never thought I could live a life like this. I never thought I could go through with those things I talked about, like my art and social interactions and navigating days off and camping trips and festivals. I never thought I could do those things without cannabis and without substances. And yet here I am doing them every day. It's absolutely fantastic. It's so cathartic. It's something that I'm endlessly proud of. And I just want to carry that message and talk about it and tell people about it and tell them how great it was for me. And yes, it was also very hard, but at the end of the day, it did so much for me.
So we've reached the end of today's interview, and the last question I have for you is, if our listeners could take away one thing from today's interview, what should it be?
The biggest thing, and it's my biggest takeaway too, is that cannabis addiction is real, and if you struggle with it, you are worth treatment. You are worth help, and there is help out there. So go and get it. Go and get it, and you'll see your life improve, potentially like black to white, like mine did.
Thank you everybody for watching and listening today, and we'll catch you next episode. Bye.